Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where this time we're going to be taking a look at a few of the lost story arcs from the Clone Wars animated series created by Dave Filoni. The Clone Wars ran for 7 seasons, and in that time there were a lot of concepts, multi episode story arcs, and ideas that just never made it to the final product for one reason or another. And we're going to start off with the Dark Disciple storyline, one of my personal favorite storylines in Star Wars. And I'm so glad that it at least made it into a book. And this story basically follows the Jedi Council sending Quinlan Voss on a mission to assassinate Count Dooku. In the process, he is almost turned to the dark side. There is a love story there with Asajj Ventress, and it ultimately culminates in Ventress's death, and that is the end of her in the Clone Wars. I still have hope that someday they decide to animate this, but I'm at least glad that this story was able to be told one way or another. And it's great character development for Asajj as well as Quinlan Voss, and it's a good story. Next up, one that I would have loved to have seen. It's the duel between Cad Bane and Boba Fett. This was meant to be an exposition to show how Boba Fett got that famous dent in his helmet, and that the helmet ultimately saved his life from being killed by Cad Bane. And it was going to be a whole arc just kind of adding fuel to their rivalry to what we ultimately see culminate in the Book of Boba Fett, but it didn't make it through. And here we can see more artwork of the supposed Boba Fett storylines that were abandoned, where we see him starting to put on the armor, take on that mantle that his father left, and again have that rivalry with Cad Bane, Aura Singh, other bounty hunters of the time. I think a lot of that was just cut for time, unfortunately. With Plo Koon being one of my favorite Jedi, this episode idea that was abandoned is really sad because it's something I would have loved to have seen. It was a story where Plo Koon found Ahsoka on her homeworld, but there was another very majestic looking being that also showed up to try and take Ahsoka. And whereas Plo Koon kind of had this menacing, intimidating appearance with the mask and everything, there was a little bit of a conflict of where Ahsoka should go. And it would ultimately turn out that the other being that came to claim Ahsoka did not have good intentions, whereas Plo Koon was a Jedi, and it served a great dynamic, would have made a great little one-off story. And in this one, we would have gotten the final answer to why Yoda has good relations with the Wookiees. There was a planned story arc involving Yoda on Kashyyyk with Commander Gree, with other clones from his unit. And I think some of that was repurposed in the Bad Batch later on, but this would have been really cool to see. It would have been really cool to see Yoda's earlier interactions with the Wookiees and how he got in such good standing with them. But unfortunately, it did not make it through. And here we have another concept art of one of the creatures that would have been in that arc. You see a Wookiee riding this tiger type of animal. Always cool to get more creatures and different aliens in the Star Wars universe. So it's unfortunate this was cut. I think it would have been a really interesting story arc, but hopefully the story may be told somewhere, somehow, someday. And I could say that about a lot of the Lost Clone Wars arcs is at least there's still room to tell the stories somewhere in the future. This one is interesting. This was a planned episode to have Anakin and Ahsoka explore the underground beneath the Jedi Temple, and they would have actually discovered the Sith Temple or the remnants of the Sith Temple deep underneath the ground of Coruscant. And it's really interesting because it's something that's been stated in canon a lot is that there was this Sith shrine, this Sith temple right under the Jedi temple, and that was part of what was clouding their vision in the Force. Seeing that story told and that come to life would have been really interesting. I think it's just one of those arcs that would have added so much to the context of the Clone Wars itself and the bigger conflict as a whole. So it's an honest shame that this one didn't make it through, but it does remain in the mythos and a little bit more mysterious if it's not shown that the Jedi ever discovered this and it remains more of a secret. But still would have been really cool to see. It was supposed to be a really impactful arc for Ahsoka personally, so this is the first visit to Utapau in the timeline of the Clone Wars before what we see in Revenge of the Sith. The Crystal Crisis on Utapau arc, which was a phenomenal storyline with Obi-Wan and Anakin, him kind of missing Ahsoka and getting used to a battle without her where he's kind of back to just being buddies with Obi-Wan and they have one of their classic banters. There's a really cool villain in this arc that ended up not being used in the Clone Wars. I love his design, as you can see here. And this arc may not have added a ton as far as crazy developments or anything interesting, but it would have been really cool to see Utapau and the people previous to their introduction in Revenge of the Sith, where you can see that Kenobi tends to have a good relationship with them. I it's one of those that it's hit or miss as far as importance, but would have been cool to see regardless. But this one has been talked about in the fandom before. This is the Top Gun arc with R2 and Captain Rex. They were supposed to have an arc together where they're kind of going on a crazy mission. And, I loved a lot of the R2 stories that we got in the Clone Wars. And of course, Captain Rex is an amazing character. So putting those two together on kind of like a rogue mission would have been really fun. They gave R2 quite a bit to do in his own little stories, but definitely more story there. This is concept art of a Tusken. There was a planned Tusken arc, and I think it's interesting because they kind of repurposed that emphasis on the Tuskens a lot later on with the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian. So I'm glad that the Tuskens eventually did get more time to shine, but it was originally supposed to happen in the Clone Wars. We got to see a Tusken chieftain and have a little story with that. And of course, one of the most interesting ones, the Yuuzhan Vong, were originally supposed to be a part of the Clone Wars. Now, this wouldn't have been the classic EU Yuuzhan Vong coming to destroy the galaxy, they're immune to the Force. This was supposed to be more of a creepy, mysterious X Files type of episode where a Yuuzhan Vong ship enters the galaxy and it's just something that the heroes can't quite understand and it's really just adds a layer of mystery. I think if they were planning on doing something big with the Yuuzhan Vong in the future projects, it would have made a lot more sense to include this as kind of like a early warning sign that this was happening. But at the same time, if they're going to nerf the Yuuzhan Vong and make them not what they originally were in the expanded universe, I would rather them just leave them where they're at, don't bring them into canon and water them down. And I think a lot of people kind of feel the same way about that. But but this is just a few. There's definitely more we can cover in the future. But for this video, that's going to be all I got. I appreciate you watching. If you like the content, please hit the subscribe button. We got plenty more coming out. And as always, may the force be with you. Now let's blow up that like button and go home.